The late afternoon sun slanted low across San Diego Bay, painting the water in ribbons of gold. I stood in front of the mirror, knotting a tie I hadn't worn in months. The silk was navy blue, a gift from my late wife, Margaret. She had given it to me on my 60th birthday, laughing as she told me it matched the stormy gray in my hair. She was gone now. 3 years buried beneath the roses at Greenwood Memorial, but her voice lived in the objects she had touched, and the tie felt like a whisper of her presence. At 70, routine was my closest companion. On Sundays, I polished my shoes until they caught the light like mirrors, pressed my shirt, and prepared for dinner with my son Daniel and his wife Sophie. It was a ritual I kept, not only for them, but for myself. Margaret used to say, "Richard, showing up matters, even if they don't notice. Your presence anchors the family." So I kept showing up. The house was quiet, too quiet, save for the hum of the old ceiling fan. On the hall table sat Margaret's photograph, framed in silver. I paused, as I always did, to straighten it. She was smiling, holding our grandson Ethan in her arms, sunlight in her hair. "I am heading to Daniel's," I murmured, my voice rougher than I expected. "I'll tell you what Ethan's been up to when I get back." Talking to a photograph might have seemed foolish, but silence never judged. I reached for my blazer, draping it across my arm, when my phone buzzed sharply against the polished wood, expecting Daniel with some last-minute request perhaps to bring dessert. I glanced at the screen, but it wasn't Daniel. It was Victor Ramirez, my lawyer, my friend of nearly 40 years. The text was short, dark, and it hit me like a blow. "Richard, do not leave the house. Call me immediately. Urgent." The air seemed to thin around me. My first thought was, for him, heart attack? An accident? His wife, Elena? At our age, emergencies were no longer abstract possibilities. I fumbled for my glasses, pressed his number, and held the phone to my ear. It rang once, twice. Before he answered, his voice was calm, too calm. "Richard, are you alone?" I sank onto the oak bench by the door. "Yes." "Victor, I was just leaving for dinner. What's wrong? Are you all right?" "I am fine," he said. But there was no warmth in it, only a kind of clipped urgency. "Listen to me carefully. Sit down if you're not already." "I am sitting," I said, the jacket forgotten in my lap. "You're scaring me." There was a pause on the line, filled with the faint static of distance, though he was only across town. "I should have told you sooner, Richard. I've been reviewing the updates we made to your estate plan last fall. As part of that, I requested fresh statements from your retirement accounts. What I found," he stopped, drew a breath. "There's a problem. A very big problem." My mind scrambled for an answer. "The reports have been getting look fine. Stable. Daniel sends them to me every quarter." Another pause. His next words stripped the air from my lungs. "Those reports are forgeries. Doctored PDFs. The real bank statements show a very different picture." The room seemed to tilt. The golden light outside dimmed to gray. "What are you saying?" My voice cracked. "Over the last 2 years, Richard, someone has been systematically draining your assets. The brokerage account is nearly empty. The retirement fund has been bled dry through structured withdrawals. The nest egg you and Margaret built, the $4 million you retired, with it's almost gone. 4 million. 40 years of drafting ships, designing harbors, saving every careful dollar. Gone. That's impossible," I stammered. "No one has access but me." Victor's voice lowered, the words like stones dropping into deep water. "That's not true. You gave durable power of attorney during Margaret's illness. Remember? At the hospital. You wanted someone to manage things if you couldn't." My blood ran cold. There was only one name on that document. Daniel. My only son. The silence stretched. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. "It's Daniel," Victor said finally. "He's been liquidating your life savings." The phone almost slipped from my hand. My vision blurred. The polished floor swimming beneath me. It couldn't be true. Not my boy. Not the child Margaret had rocked to sleep. Not the young man whose college tuition I had paid in full. whose first down payment I had helped cover. Memories came in fragments. Daniel at my kitchen table last year, flipping through statements. Don't worry, Dad. The market's volatile. I'll handle the logistics. Just focus on staying healthy. Another memory. Me grumbling about a surprise property tax bill. Daniel waving it off. Already covered it. I moved some funds. Nothing to stress about. I had believed him. Every word. Every reassuring smile. But now, in Victor's voice, those same words became blades. Sheaths of deception. Victor, my voice shook. Are you certain? He exhaled slowly. A sound filled with years of experience and sorrow. I wish I wasn't. I have the bank's official records in front of me. Richard. This isn't a mistake. This is deliberate. Calculated. I pressed a trembling hand to my forehead. The man in the mirror moments ago, dressed for dinner, had felt like a father, a grandfather, a man with roots. Now I felt hollowed out. A shell built on lies. Victor's voice sharpened. You cannot let Daniel know that you know. Do you understand? You must go to dinner tonight. Act as if nothing is wrong. Smile. Ask about Ethan. Let him believe his control is complete. If he suspects, hell, move what's left. Bury it where we can't trace it. We need time. Richard. Time to map where your money went. A performance. I whispered. Yes. Victor said. From this moment on, you are not just my friend. You are my client. And we are at war. A war Daniel doesn't know has begun. I sat frozen, phone pressed against my ear, the word war echoing in my chest. I was an engineer. I had built harbors, piers, vessels meant to weather storms. I had never built battle plans. But beneath the grief, a new clarity stirred. The structure was damaged. The foundation cracked. But there was still time to shore it up, to rebuild, to fight. I understand, I said, though my voice was hoarse. The performance begins now. I hung up. For a long moment, I sat in silence, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. Then, with shaking hands, I slipped on the blazer, smoothed the lapels, and forced myself to stand. I was no longer the man who had left for dinner 1,000 Sundays before. That man was gone. Tonight, I would walk into my son's house smiling. Tonight, I would play the part of the weary old father, still trusting, still blind. But beneath the smile, I was something else entirely. I was a man preparing for war. The drive across San Diego that night felt like a passage through a city I no longer recognized. Streetlights bled across my windshield in long, watery streaks, each one reminding me of numbers on a ledger, vanishing into someone else's account. The familiar palm trees lining Harbor Drive swayed in the ocean breeze, but instead of comfort they looked like silent witnesses to my humiliation. When Margaret was alive, she loved this drive. Shed hum, along with the radio, pointing out the ships in the distance, the yachts glittering at the marina. I had promised her stability, safety, a retirement spent traveling and doting on grandchildren. $4 million was supposed to last us a lifetime. Now it had vanished into the abyss, siphoned by the hands of my own son. I tightened my grip on the wheel. Victor's words still echoed in my mind. Smile. Pretend. Don't let him know. By the time I reached Daniel's neighborhood, my face was fixed into what I hoped passed as calm. His home sat on a hill above La Jolla, all glass and stone, glowing against the night sky. A monument to wealth. A monument built, I now knew, on the ruins of my life. Sophie opened the door, her perfume drifting into the night air. She greeted me with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Richard, you made it. Come in. Come in. I stepped inside, and the sheer scale of it struck me. Marble floors, a chandelier like a cascade of stars, walls hung with art I recognized from glossy auction catalogs. Everything gleamed. Everything whispered of money. My money? Daniel appeared from the living room, a glass of wine in hand, his smile practiced. Dad. Good to see you. His embrace was brief, perfunctory. I felt the hard press of his watch against my wrist, a Rolex, one I hadn't seen before. The price tag of that watch was probably higher than a year of my pension. We moved into the dining room. The table was set for 3, gleaming with silver cutlery and crystal glasses. The meal was extravagant. Lamb chops, truffle mashed potatoes. A bottle of wine I knew cost more than my first car. As we sat, Sophie leaned in, her diamond earrings catching the light. "We have good news," she said, her voice lilting with triumph. "Daniel finally closed on that project in Cabo. A luxury hotel by the beach. It's going to be huge." Daniel grinned, lifting his glass. "High return on investment. Dad, you'll be proud. This is the kind of deal that sets us up for life." Proud. The word tasted like ash. I nodded, feigning interest, though my stomach churned. The project wasn't just their gamble, it was my life savings on the line. And they didn't even realize I knew. The conversation flowed, but it was all one-sided. They talked about renovations to the kitchen, about summering in Europe, about enrolling Ethan in a private academy with tuition that could buy a house. I nodded in all the right places, smiled when I had to, while my insides collapsed like a bridge under too much weight. Halfway through the meal, Daniel set down his fork and adopted a tone of careful concern. "Dad, I've been looking at your accounts. The market's shaky. Maybe we should move some of your holdings into bonds. Something safer. I just don't want you to take unnecessary risks." The gall of it almost made me choke. He was warning me about risks, while secretly draining every account. He was using Margaret's memory, my trust, as a weapon. I forced a weary smile. "That's thoughtful of you. Son, you've been such a help with all this. I don't know what it'd do without you." Relief flickered across his face, subtle but unmistakable. He believed the performance. He thought his perfect crime was still perfect. When dinner ended, I excused myself quickly. Sophie hugged me lightly, her diamond bracelet biting into my arm. Daniel clapped me on the shoulder, as if staking a claim. "Don't worry about a thing. Dad, I'll take care of you." I nodded, my smile brittle. "I know you will." The drive home was a blur. The lights of the city no longer sparkled, they stabbed. Every red light was an accusation. Every green light a push into the nightmare. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house loomed dark and silent. I stepped inside, loosened my tie, and collapsed into the armchair Margaret used to call my captain's chair. For a long time, I simply sat there, staring at the family photos lining the mantel. Daniel at 10, grinning with a missing tooth. Daniel at 20, tossing his graduation cap. Daniel at 30, holding baby Ethan. Where had that boy gone? I don't know how long I sat before my phone buzzed again. "Victor." "Richard," he said when I answered. His voice was clipped, businesslike. "I know tonight was hard, but we need to act quickly. I've engaged a forensic accountant. Her name is Elena Cho. She's the best in San Diego. I want you to meet her tomorrow morning." "Elena," I repeated, the name foreign in my mouth. "Shell map everything," Victor continued. "Every withdrawal, every shell company, every fake statement. We need a complete picture before Daniel realizes we're on to him." I rubbed a hand over my face. "Victor, I don't know if I can do this. But he's my son." There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. "Richard, he's not acting like a son. He's acting like a predator. And predators don't stop until they're stopped. If you want to protect what's left for yourself, for Ethan you need to fight. And I'll be right beside you." I closed my eyes. Margaret's face appeared in my mind. Her smile steady, her eyes fierce. Protect Ethan. She would have said it that way. Clear. Simple. When I opened my eyes again, something had shifted. The grief was still there, raw and heavy, but underneath it a harder substance was forming. Resolve. "All right," I said quietly. "I'll meet her." The next morning, Victor's office was bright with sunlight, its walls lined with law books that smelled faintly of dust and leather. He was waiting for me at the door, his suit crisp, his expression grim. Inside sat a woman in her early 30s, her black hair cropped short, her eyes sharp and steady. She rose when I entered, offered her hand. "Elena Cho, she said simply. Her handshake was firm, her presence commanding without being loud. I could see immediately why Victor trusted her. She spread out a folder on the table, pages filled with numbers, charts, and arrows. Mr. Ravel. Lawson. You've already traced several transfers from your accounts. They're being funneled into an LLC Pacific Horizons controlled by your son. From there, the funds move offshore, into accounts tied to the hotel project in Cabo. I leaned forward, staring at the neat lines and arrows that told the story of my ruin. Your son isn't just spending your savings, she continued. He's laundering it, hiding it in plain sight. This isn't incompetence, Mr. Ravel. Lawson. It's strategy. I felt my chest tighten, but I forced myself to keep listening. The engineer in me needed the data, needed to understand the structure before I could rebuild. Victor leaned across the table, his eyes on mine. This is no longer about trust, Richard. This is about survival. If Daniel gets wind of what we're doing, hell move the rest. We need him overconfident. We need him to believe you're still blind. And how do we do that? I asked, my voice low. Alina's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. We let him think he's won. And then we show him what real strategy looks like. Her words hung in the air, cold and precise. In that moment, I realized the truth. The battle had already begun. By late afternoon, the wind had shifted off the water, carrying that faint briny smell you only notice if you have lived by the bay long enough to take it for granted. I stood on my patio and watched a sailboat stitch a slow white line across the horizon, then checked my watch. If I was going to wear a mask, it needed to fit perfectly. I chose the softest cardigan I owned instead of a blazer, left the tie on its hook, and scuffed the toes of my loafers against the mat so they would not gleam. I practiced a small, apologetic smile in the hallway mirror. The man looking back at me was still tall, still upright, but thinner at the edges. A little tired, a little lost. The kind of man a concerned son might want to shepherd. On the drive to La Jolla, I rehearsed lines out loud, adjusting intonation the way I used to adjust tolerances on steel. If I paused in the right places and softened the consonants, even simple sentences sounded older. It felt strange, engineering my own weakness. But Victor's instruction was clear. Comfort breeds carelessness. I needed Daniel comfortable. Sophie opened the door before I knocked. The scent of citrus and rosemary drifted from the kitchen. She wore a white dress that draped like water, and a bracelet that could have bought the boat I had watched an hour earlier. You look good, Richard, she said, her tone light. Come in. Daniel is finishing a call. I let my gaze travel around the foyer as if dazzled by the chandelier, when in truth, I was mapping angles, sight lines, and the distance from the entry table to the living room. The model ship in their glass case was a replica of the America's Cup yacht from the 90s. All polished mahogany and taut white sails. I filed that away. Too elegant to tamper with. I would need something smaller for later. Daniel strode in, phone in hand, smile already set. Dad. Right on time. On the screen behind him, a muted news channel scrolled a ticker about markets wobbling. He noticed my glance and clicked it off with a flourish. No need to watch that noise tonight, he said. We eat. We celebrate. Cabo is humming. I widened my eyes. A half step slower than usual. Cabo? He clapped my shoulder. A little too hard. The hotel. Pre-construction deposits are full. We move to phase 2 next month. It is going to be big. The last word hung in the air like a promise. Or a debt. Dinner was seared, tuna with sesame, and a salad dotted with pomegranate seeds that snapped between my teeth like tiny firecrackers. Sophie spoke about a collaboration line for her boutique, a capsule collection made from sustainable fabrics. I asked questions that sounded eager, but soft, the way my father used to ask me about trigonometry when he barely knew the word. How do you keep track of all the numbers? I asked, letting a faint tremor into my hand as I set down the fork. The apps change every week. Your mother was better at this than I am. Sophie smiled in a way that revealed nothing. Daniel leaned in. That is why you have me, Dad. Do not worry about statements or portals. I will consolidate everything. One dashboard. You will only need to look at the top line. He was good. Even his reassurances had the rhythm of command. We ate. They talked about a kitchen contractor who specialized in marble shipped from a limestone quarry near Verona. They debated whether Ethan should focus on robotics or debate club. There was a story about a party in Bird Rock where someone brought a DJ from New York, and the neighbors called the police at midnight. I laughed in the right places and sipped water slowly, and asked for the name of the contractor twice. As if I could not quite keep it in place. Halfway through dessert. A panna cotta, the color of ivory. Daniel set down his spoon and folded his hands. Dad. I have been thinking. The stairs in your house are unforgiving. If you ever slipped, no one would hear you. Sophie found a single-level place in Mission Hills with a view of the canyons. It would be easy. Safer. We can handle the sale and transfer everything. No stress. I let silence fill the space between us. Then nodded with a gratitude I did not feel. You always think of me, I said, letting my voice fray a little. It is a blessing. He relaxed, shoulders down by a millimeter. He had just offered what sounded like care, and I had accepted it. Bond reinforced. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone like a man navigating a device he did not trust. Would you look at this? I said, tapping the screen twice and missing the icon on purpose. The bank sent me an email about two-factor something. I tried to get in to see the last statement, but it asked me for a code I could not find. Could you help me next time we meet? I pushed the phone an inch across the table, then drew it back as if embarrassed. The invitation sat there, visible, then receded. I did not want access to flow in his direction tonight. I wanted him to believe I still lived happily behind the fog of his forgeries, peering out only when guided by his hand. Of course. Dad, he said. Warm again. No rush. I have everything covered. We cleared the plates. Daniel walked the dishes to the kitchen with a practiced ease that used to make me proud. I wandered to the living room and paused before the floor-to-ceiling glass. The pool lay smooth as black granite, a perfect mirror for the city lights beyond. Do you remember that summer in Newport, when you were 12? I asked, speaking to the glass more than to my son. We rented the skiff with the sputtering engine, and you insisted we could beat the tide home. He laughed. Barely. What I heard was calculation. What I saw in reflection was a man measuring how much of my body weight leaned toward the past and how much remained in the present. He wanted the past heavy. He wanted the present soft. On cue. Sophie called from the kitchen. Ethan just texted. Robotics Club moved to Saturdays. He asked if Grandpa can take him to the Maritime Museum on Sunday instead. The museum. Deck timbers and rigging and plaques with names of vessels cut into brass. I pictured Ethan's small fingers tracing the letters. Tell him I would like that more than anything, I said, and felt my throat constrict. When it was time to go, I made the first small move of my own. At the door, I patted my pockets, then frowned, widening my eyes by just enough. My wallet, I said, half to myself. I must have left it near the mantel when I checked my phone. I am so sorry. Sophie waved a dismissive hand. We will find it. Do not worry. I will have Daniel bring it by tomorrow. No. No, I said quickly, then softened the refusal into a sheepish grin. I will be in the neighborhood in the morning. Let me swing by. Silly of me. It was nothing. A hiccup at the threshold. But it gave me standing to appear without ceremony. And in my experience, the most revealing conversations happen in doorways, not at tables. Daniel hugged me at the top step. His chin touched my shoulder for the briefest second, long enough to register the absence of real pressure. Call if you need anything, he said. On the drive home, I took surface streets. I wanted stop signs, not blinking lights. I wanted intersections where I could pause and look both ways and pretend that choice still lived in the simple act of turning left. At the house, I did not turn on the overheads. I moved through pools of lamplight, touching the back of a chair here, the edge of a frame there, the way a blind man maps a room he used to know by heart. I poured water and sat on the floor with my back against the sofa, my legs stretched out in front of me like a teenager. The phone buzzed once on the table. A new email from the bank reminding me to complete my security update. I deleted nothing. I opened nothing. I left every digital breadcrumb exactly where it lay. The morning arrived shaped like clarity. The sky over Point Loma was so clean it looked polished. I drove to a cafe near Victor's office and ordered coffee I barely tasted. At a small metal table outside, I spread a notepad and drew lines the way I used to sketch hull curves. A line from me to Daniel. A line from Daniel to accounts. A line from accounts to the LLC Elena had named Pacific Horizons. Beside the page I wrote the words, comfort and arrogance, and circled them both. Between the circles I added a narrow bridge. My job was to keep him on that bridge as long as possible. I met Victor and Elena at 10. Elena wore a slate blouse and had that morning's certainty in her eyes. "How did the mask fit?" she asked. "Well enough," I said. "He likes the version of me who needs reminding." "Good," Victor said, opening a leather folio. "We will give him reminders. And then we will give him motives. But not yet." Elena pulled up a screen and turned the monitor toward me. "This is the flow into Pacific Horizons over 18 months. Regular transfers timed against your benefit disbursements. He is leveraging your predictability. We will use his." She tapped another tab. "I have also mapped one of Safi's wholesalers in Los Angeles. Her invoices spike 3 days after the largest withdrawals. It is a cycle dressed as growth." Victor slid a single sheet across the table. "Not yet a plan so much as a premise. We need him to fear losing the prize he has not yet stolen," he said. "He thinks the house is a future certainty. If that certainty trembles, he will reach. Reaching hands leave fingerprints." I looked at the page. A few sentences. A sentiment I could repeat without sounding rehearsed. "You will not say this to him," Victor added. "You will say it to someone who cannot help himself." Elena smiled, with no humor in it. "Every neighborhood has a messenger. Find yours." I knew exactly who he meant the moment she said it. Frank Dillard had been leaving gossip on doorsteps since the 80s. He did not mean harm. Harm simply followed him the way shadows follow hips in late afternoon. I closed the folio and sat back. The fear in my chest had not gone. It had not even retreated. But it had changed shape. It no longer fluttered. It pressed forward. "One more thing," Elena said, her voice quieter. "Tonight, after you fetch your wallet, ask for tea. Give them 10 minutes. Kitchens are where people speak freely. If you can, notice surfaces. Places where sound can be hidden without being seen." I nodded. I was already thinking of the model ship in my own living room. A different one. Smaller. A gift from Margaret that had a hollow base, where we once stashed birthday clues for Ethan. Some objects invite secrets. Others protect them. When I left the office, the wind had picked up again. A steady push from the west. I walked to the edge of the parking lot where the asphalt met a strip of succulents and watched a gull ride the current without moving its wings. That would be my work now. Less flapping. More, holding the right angle and letting the air carry me where I needed to go. That evening, as the sun melted into a slab of orange over the water, I drove back to La Jolla to retrieve a wallet I had never lost. I practiced my small smile in the mirror and checked the seams of the cardigan for loose threads. When Sophie opened the door, she looked surprised, then pleased. Daniel called from the kitchen for me to come in. A kettle hissed. The sound cut through the rooms like a line on a chart, dividing before and after. I stepped over it and breathed in. The performance continued. The scene changed. The script, at last, would be mine to write. The morning fog rolled in from the Pacific, a white veil softening the skyline of San Diego. I sat in Victor's office again, the blinds half drawn, the smell of coffee mingling with the faint tang of paper and ink. This room had become my war room, the place where illusions were stripped away, and the truth, however ugly, was laid bare. Victor stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back like a general surveying a battlefield. Across the table, Elena had spread out a fresh set of documents. Her laptop screen glowed with flowcharts and maps of money trails so complex they looked almost like artwork spiderwebs of arrows connecting banks, companies, and offshore accounts. "Pacific Horizons LLC," she said, tapping the name at the center of it all. "On paper, it's a real estate development firm. In reality, it's a shell your son's funnel. From your retirement account to this LLC, then wired to accounts tied to a failing resort project in Cabo. After that, smaller amounts loop back into Safi's boutique, disguised as legitimate sales revenue. I leaned forward, staring at the arrows. Each one felt like a stab wound. So my savings have been turned into their prop. Exactly, Elena said. They're building a paper empire on your life's work. But the resort is bleeding money. Construction delays. Investors pulling out. They're desperate. Which means they're reckless. That works in our favor. Victor turned from the window, his gaze sharp. Richard, what Elena's showing you is damning. But right now, Daniel thinks he's untouchable. He believes you're still blind. If we want to bring him down, we need him to overreach. We need him to act fast and make mistakes. I rubbed my temples. And how do we force that? Victor's lips curved into something cold. By threatening the one thing he's counting on. Your house. The room went quiet. My house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was the last piece of Margaret left in the world. She had planted the roses in the back garden, chosen the oak floors herself, filled every room with warmth. The idea of dangling it as bait twisted something deep inside me. But I also saw Ethan's face in my mind, his wide, curious eyes. The way he still asked me about the ships I used to design. If sacrificing sentiment was the only way to save his future, then I would do it. Victor laid out the plan. You're going to confide in the right person, someone who can't keep his mouth shut. You'll say you're lonely, overwhelmed, and seriously considering selling your coastal home to move into a retirement community in Palm Springs. A place with sun, golf, catered meals, easy living. I blinked. Palm Springs. Why there? Because it's believable, Victor said. You're 70, widowed, rattling around in a big house. No one would question it. And once the gossip reaches Daniel, hell panic. That house is his endgame. He's counting on inheriting it, maybe even liquidating it to cover his losses in Mexico. If he thinks you're about to sell it, he won't be able to hide his hand. Elena chimed in, her voice calm but firm. When people like Daniel panic, they double down. Hell, push harder to control you, to protect you. Hell reveal just how far he's willing to go. And that's when we catch him. I sat back, exhaling slowly. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, brutal in its intent. It used his greed as the lever, and his arrogance as the fulcrum. But beneath the strategist's satisfaction was the ache of a father. To bait my son, to use my home. Margaret's memory. It felt like tearing at the fabric of everything we had built. Victor saw the hesitation in my face. His voice softened, just a fraction. Richard, I know this hurts. But you need to remember he already tore the fabric. We're just pulling the loose thread until the whole lie unravels. The next day, I set the plan in motion. I met Frank Dillard at the Marina Cafe. The same Frank who had carried gossip through our neighborhood for decades. His booming laugh could be heard across a room, and his promises of discretion were as flimsy as tissue paper. We sat by the window, the salt air drifting in as seagulls wheeled overhead. I ordered black coffee, hands folded, like a man burdened by too much thought. Frank, I said, letting a weary sigh escape. This house is getting too big for me. The stairs, the upkeep, it's too much. Since Margaret passed, it's just empty. I've been thinking maybe it's time to sell. Move someplace easier. A retirement villa in Palm Springs. Perhaps. His eyebrows shot up. Palm Springs, that's a big change. Richard. I gave a small, sad laugh. Golf courses. Catered meals. No roofs to fix. Just peace. What's the point of rattling around in a mausoleum alone? Frank leaned in. A voice dropping, though. Everyone knew he couldn't keep a secret. You serious? As serious as I've ever been, I said, then glanced away as if embarrassed by my own confession. By the time we parted, I knew the news would travel faster than the tide. By evening, Daniel would know, and by tomorrow, he would act. When I returned home, the roses in the back garden were in bloom, their petals glowing in the late sunlight. Margaret's roses. I knelt and touched one gently, the softness at odds with the hard resolve settling inside me. For 2 years, Daniel had bled me dry, building a palace of lies on a foundation of theft. For 2 years, I had been the blind man in his story, But not anymore. The bait was cast. The water was still. And I knew, with a certainty that tightened my chest, that the next ripple would be Daniel's hand reaching for what he thought was his. And when he did, the trap would close. By Thursday morning, the city hummed with its usual rhythm, commuters inching along the I-5, gulls crying over the harbor, joggers tracing the edge of the Embarcadero. But inside my house, the stillness was heavy, charged. I knew the gossip had reached Daniel. I could almost feel it in the vibration of my phone lying on the kitchen counter. It didn't take long. At exactly 6:17 that evening, my screen lit up. Daniel. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Dad? His voice was tight, too carefully modulated. I just heard something from Frank Dillard. He said, "You're thinking of selling the house. Moving to Palm Springs? Is that true?" I swallowed a smile and let a tired chuckle slip out. Oh. Was I not supposed to mention that? Frank and I were talking. It's just an idea. Son. The stairs are getting steeper every year. And the yard. I sighed. It's a lot for one man. The silence on the line buzzed with his panic. Then came the words, sharp and urgent. Dad. You can't. That house is where Mom's memories are. Every room, every rose bush she planted, it's part of the family. You can't just give it away to strangers. The performance was flawless. Grief, sentiment, devotion. But beneath it, I heard the edge of fear, the frantic calculation. I don't know, Daniel, I murmured, letting my voice wobble with indecision. Palm Springs sounds peaceful. Just sun, no worries. Well, talk, he said quickly, almost too quickly. Sophie and I are coming by Saturday afternoon. Well, go over everything. Please. Dad. Don't make any decisions until then. I promised to think about it, then hung up, staring at the darkened phone until my reflection looked back at me. Eyes hard. The trap was working. That night, Victor and I met in his office, the hum of the city muted by the thick glass windows. Elena joined us, her laptop glowing with fresh data. They're bleeding, she said, scrolling through transactions. Pacific Horizons is collapsing. Investor withdrawals. Unpaid contractors. Lawsuits piling up. If the house sale goes through, it would be the lifeline they need. Victor leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. This Saturday is the pivot point. They'll come armed with documents, persuasion, whatever it takes to tighten their grip. That's when we collect the proof. From his desk drawer, he pulled out a small object, no larger than a sugar cube. Matte black, with a pinhole at its center. A recorder, he said simply. High definition. Long battery life. Place it somewhere inconspicuous. Somewhere close enough to catch every word. We need to hear their masks drop. I held the device in my palm. Its weight, deceptively light. And once we have it? Then, Victor said, his voice low and certain, they'll have handed us the rope to hang them with. Saturday came draped in sunlight, so bright it almost felt mocking. I rose early, moving through the house with deliberate calm. Coffee brewed, roses watered, blinds adjusted. Everything in its place. At 10 o'clock, I pulled down the old model ship from the mantel, Margaret's favorite. A replica of the USS Constitution. She used to dust it every week, running her fingers over the tiny cannons and sails. The base was hollow. A clever little compartment where we once hid Ethan's birthday clues. With trembling hands, I placed the recorder inside, securing it with a strip of tape. From the outside, it was the same beloved decoration it had always been. But now, it was something else. A silent witness. When the doorbell rang that afternoon, I was already seated in the living room, cardigan draped around my shoulders, glasses low on my nose. Daniel and Sophie swept in like a power couple on parade. Daniel in a tailored blazer, Sophie in a silk blouse that shimmered under the light. They carried a thick, leather-bound folder between them. Dad, Daniel said warmly, too warmly. We're here to help. Let's talk this through. I smiled faintly, gesturing toward the sofa. Of course. Sit. I'll make us some tea in a moment. They spread the folder open on the coffee table. Charts. Graphs. Pages thick with numbers. Look, Sophie said, her tone dripping with concern. The market's down. If you sell now, you'll lose 15% of the value. It's just not smart. We don't want you regretting anything. I squinted at the pages, letting my confusion show. So many numbers, it's complicated for me. That's what we're here for, Daniel said soothingly, reaching to tap the charts. Well, manage everything. You just focus on enjoying life. I leaned back, sighing. All I know is the stairs get steeper every day. And Palm Springs sounds simple. Sunshine. No worries. For just a flicker of a moment, frustration cracked through Daniel's smile. His eyes hardened before he smoothed them over again. Think about Mom, he said softly. His trump card. The garden she planted. The kitchen where we had every Thanksgiving. You can't sell those memories. The words were knives, twisting, using Margaret's memory as a tool. I felt rage simmer beneath my calm, but I kept my mask in place. Let me make tea, I said, rising slowly, my head spinning with all this talk. I walked into the kitchen, filled the kettle, and waited. The hiss of water against metal filled the silence. Then I heard it. Daniel's voice, low and sharp. You don't think he'll actually sell, do you, Sophie? If he does, we're finished. The investors in Cabo are already breathing down my neck. Sophie's voice followed, brittle with tension. We can't let him. He's more confused than I thought. This whole Palm Springs nonsense proves it. If he won't listen, well, take the next step. My hand froze on the kettle. The next step? Daniel whispered. Yes, Sophie said coldly. A conservatorship. Well, prove he's incompetent. With that, the house is ours to protect. He won't have a choice. The kettle hissed louder, masking the sound of my ragged breathing. My hands gripped the counter until my knuckles whitened. When I finally walked back into the living room, tray in hand, they were seated as though nothing had happened, smiling, concerned, loving, but their true faces were already captured inside the tiny ship on my mantle. They had no idea the net had already closed. The papers arrived on a Wednesday under a flat, gray sky, the kind of morning that made the ocean look like poured lead. I was pruning the roses when a white sedan stopped at the curb. A man in a rumpled blazer stepped out, asked my name, and placed a thick envelope in my hands with the practiced neutrality of someone who had delivered bad news to strangers for a living. By the time the taillights disappeared, the weight of the envelope had already settled on my chest. I carried it inside, set it on the oak table, and stared at my reflection in the glass of the patio door. I had designed breakwaters to disperse force, to turn crashing energy into harmless swirls. There is no breakwater, I thought. For what is done by blood. I called Victor. Bring it here, he said. No preamble. Now. His office felt colder than usual, though the air conditioner was set to the same number as always. He slit the envelope with a silver letter opener and spread the contents across the table with the gentleness of a surgeon who knows there is nothing delicate about a tumor. A petition for conservatorship, he said. Voice flat. Filed by Daniel Lawson. Petitioner. Regarding Richard Lawson. Respondent. He flicked through the pages. Allegations of significant cognitive decline. Claims of erratic financial decisions. A declaration that you have become fixated on selling your primary residence, which they say would place you at grave risk of financial destitution. He looked up at me. They are using your bait as their noose. I swallowed and nodded. Keep going. Supporting declarations from 2 concerned friends, he said, sliding over the notarized pages. Names I did not recognize. I ran their names this morning when Elena flagged them. Both are investors in the Cabo project. They claim you appeared confused and emotionally volatile at recent social gatherings. He held up another document. And this one is a preliminary psychological statement from a doctor, Caleb Porter. He met you once, informally, at an event Daniel arranged. Based on that brief conversation, he states he has serious concerns about your ability to manage your affairs. I tried to remember the man. A party with a rented bartender. String lights looped over a rented deck. A gray-haired guest who asked me what year the Midway was commissioned, and then nodded at my answer without any follow-up. That was the examination. Victor set the stack down and steepled his fingers. This is not an accident, Richard. This is a playbook. They push you toward alarm. They provide witnesses to the alarm. They add a doctor to drape it in authority. Then they ask the court for control. I felt the first real tremor of fear since this began. The kind that starts low and spreads through ribs and wrists, and all the small places you cannot brace. He will win, I said, hearing how small it sounded in the room. If a judge looks at this alone, he will win. Victor did not answer right away. He stood, walked to the window, and watched a gull wheel once, and vanish beyond the building. When he turned back, the calm that lived in his bones had returned to his face. He will not, he said, because we are not going to fight this on their terms. We are going to welcome it. They have dragged their private fraud into a public forum. Now we will put their motives and their methods on the record. He slid a yellow legal pad across to me. First, we do not argue about capacity based only on your word. The court will appoint an independent psychiatrist. We will ask for Dr. Lila Moreno. She has no ties to either side, and a reputation for rigor. You will meet her. You will be yourself. No theater. No speeches. Just the man who can explain the load paths of a pier and the budget of a house down to the penny. Second, Elena will finalize the full map of the money. Not just high-level charts, but timed entries, bank confirmations, and invoice trails that show exactly how your accounts fed Pacific Horizons and how Pacific Horizons fed their life. We will show that their crusade to protect you coincides perfectly with the need to protect themselves. Third, he said, tapping the folder, we will authenticate the recording you made. Chain of custody, device provenance, timestamp verification. They will call it entrapment in spirit, if not in law. It does not matter. They were not questioned. They were not coerced. They planned a legal seizure of your autonomy in your living room. He paused. And fourth, he added quietly, we will look back at Margaret. The air shifted a few degrees colder. What do you mean? Look back at Margaret. Elena stepped in from the adjoining conference room, a tablet in hand and a seriousness in her eyes I had not seen since our first meeting. While mapping Pacific Horizons, I cross-referenced all family-linked accounts and instruments to make sure nothing else was feeding the pipeline. Your late wife had a life insurance policy designated years ago for a trust in your grandson Ethan's name. 3 weeks before she passed, a change of beneficiary was filed, redirecting the payout to Daniel. My mouth went dry. Margaret would not have done that. I know. Elena said. I pulled archived samples of her signature from bank and legal files. The angle, the pressure pattern, the formation of the G. None of it matches the amendment form. I am not a handwriting expert, so I will not state a conclusion, but I will recommend one. Victor has a specialist on call. Victor nodded. If it is a forgery, we will know by the time we enter that courtroom. The next week moved with a strange combination of speed and suspension, like sailing with a strong wind and a foul current at the same time. I woke early, made lists, and then watched as professionals turned lists into action. My appointment with Dr. Find Moreno took place in a sunlit office that smelled faintly of tea and fresh paper. She wore a blue blouse and no jewelry and asked questions that were simple in structure and difficult in the way a good knot is difficult. Tell me about your work, not just titles. What did you build? Tell me about your daily routines, not what you think they should be, what they are. We did memory tests that felt less like traps and more like bridges I could step across at my own pace. We talked about grief as a structure that must be maintained like any other, about budgets and grocery lists, about which credit cards I used where and why. I did not speak of Daniel. I did not mention Cabo. I did not try to sell her anything. I tried only to answer the question in front of me with the same precision I would have used to calculate load on a piling. At the end of our second session, she closed her notebook and looked up with a small nod that felt like a door opening. Thank you, Mr. Miser. Lawson, she said. That will be all. Elena spent long nights in front of twin monitors, the blue light cutting shapes under her eyes. She and her small team folded statements and wire confirmations into a narrative that did not require adjectives. Outflows from my IRA and brokerage, in regular amounts after benefit disbursements. Identical inflows into Pacific horizons. Oscillations in SOFIs, boutique revenues, 3 days after each major withdrawal. Photos of a Tesla delivery registration, cross-referenced with a wire, initiated 2 hours earlier from my account. It was not a theory. It was a map. Victor crafted the legal frame the way I had once drafted a hull. He laid precedents side by side, highlighted the definition of elder financial abuse and breach of fiduciary duty, drafted motions to compel original bank records and to strike hearsay from the declarations of Daniel's friends. He prepared questions for cross-examination that did not shout. They did not need to. They asked only for specifics. And specifics were where lies went to die. In my quiet hours, I walked the house and touched the places where Margaret's choices still lived. The little gouge in the oak floor where she dropped the mixing bowl, the first Thanksgiving after Ethan was born. The paint fleck on the back door where I had been careless with the brush, and she had said, "Leave it. It is proof we did this ourselves." I sat in the garden and pruned the roses shorter than usual. A kind of preparing, as if removing excess could make the core stronger. On the Friday before the hearing, Victor called with a tone I had learned to recognize. "We have it," he said. "What did you find?" "2 things. 1. Dr. Moreno's report. I cannot read it to you over the phone, but I can say you will sleep tonight. 2. The handwriting expert's preliminary opinion regarding the life insurance amendment. He is prepared to testify that it is not Margaret's signature." I closed my eyes and felt the world tilt, and then right itself like a boat cutting through a swell. A strange calm followed. Not joy. Not even relief. A quiet alignment. The truth was arranging itself in a straight line. On the morning of the hearing, I woke before dawn and sat on the edge of the bed in my shirt sleeves, watching the light lift the edges of the curtains. I thought about all the men I had worked with who believed storms could be outlasted by stubbornness. They could not. They could only be handled by respecting the forces at play and building accordingly. I dressed, ate half a piece of toast, and watered the roses. I told Margaret I was leaving for court and felt foolish, and then felt better for having said it aloud. The drive downtown was gentle with traffic. I took a space on level 3, memorized the stall number twice, and walked to the courthouse with my shoulders back and my steps even. Victor met me at the security checkpoint and pressed a hand to my arm. A steadying touch that existed for less than a second and did its work. "Remember," he said, "do not carry their story into your voice. Carry only your own." We entered Department 23 and sat at the respondent table. Across the aisle, Daniel and Sophie looked composed, their clothes expensive and perfectly chosen. Daniel's lawyer, a man with silver hair and a courtroom smile, stacked his notes with the confidence of someone who believed narrative could outpace evidence. When the clerk called the case and the judge took the bench, the room fell into that particular quiet that lives only in places where decisions change lives. I folded my hands, aligned my breathing with the slow rise and fall I used on choppy seas, and looked straight ahead. This was not the end. It was the moment the record began to speak for itself. A 23 settled into a brittle hush as the clerk called our case. The judge, a woman with still eyes and a reputation for cutting through theatrics, took the bench and glanced over the file as if weighing the heft of the paper against the gravity of the petition. I folded my hands and kept my gaze level. Victor sat beside me, his legal pad turned to a clean page. Across the aisle, Daniel straightened his cuffs while Sophie adjusted a necklace that flashed like a small blade beneath the fluorescent lights. Daniel's lawyer rose first, a silver-haired man whose voice had the velvet sheen of practiced sympathy. He began with a portrait of decline. He spoke about a once capable father now lost in the fog of grief, a widower adrift, a man making rash decisions that threatened to erase a lifetime of work. He described my plan to sell the house as sudden, irrational, and dangerous. He described me as vulnerable to scams, confused by modern banking, prone to misplacing things and repeating stories. He said the petition was an act of love. He called the first witness, a man I did not know, but now recognized as one of Daniel's Cabo investors. The witness spoke about meeting me at a charity dinner where, he claimed, I had mixed details from separate conversations and asked the same question 3 times. He said my eyes seemed distant, my mood unsteady, my comments about Palm Springs alarming. He described the exchange like a health professional, charting symptoms. The second witness, Another investor with a lacquered confidence told a similar story. I had, he said, confused a discussion of school tuition with stock dividends. Insisted that my late wife liked a singer who had only become famous after her death, and stared for a long time at a dessert fork, as if waiting for it to explain itself. His words drew a muted chuckle from the gallery. Daniel's lawyer let the sound hang in the air for a beat, then frowned to demonstrate dignity. Finally he called Dr. Caleb Porter, the paid physician Daniel had paraded at a party months ago. Porter wore a tidy suit, and the posture of a man who loved the sound of his name attached to the word doctor. He admitted on direct examination that his contact with me had been brief, informal, and social, and that he had not performed any diagnostic testing. Still, he felt compelled to inform the court that he had concerns. He described my affect as flattened, and my recall as inconsistent. He concluded by saying that while he could not diagnose me, he suspected impairment. The lawyer returned to the lectern with the slow gravity of someone placing his last stone on a carefully balanced cairn. He reminded the court that the goal was protection, not punishment. He asked that the court place my estate and person under Daniel's control, both to prevent the sale of the house and to safeguard my future. For a moment after he sat, the room was very quiet. The judge took notes with a pen that never scratched. She looked down the bench at me. Then she nodded toward Victor. Counsel, your response. Victor rose without rustling a single page. He took one step forward and let the silence clarify the distance between narrative and proof. Your Honor, the petitioner has asked this court to accept a story. We will ask the court to accept the record. He did not raise his voice. He did not soften it either. He called our first witness. Dr. Ride. Leila Moreno entered with a manila folder and a calm that felt like good weather after weeks of bad. She took the stand, swore in, and sat with her hands folded on the rail. Victor moved to the side so he could look at her without turning his back to the court. Dr. Ride. Moreno. Did the court appoint you to conduct an independent evaluation of Mr. Lawson's capacity to manage his affairs? Yes. How many sessions did you conduct? 2. Each approximately 90 minutes, plus standardized testing and collateral review. And did you meet socially with Mr. Lawson before the evaluation? No. In your professional opinion, does Mr. Lawson suffer from cognitive impairment that would render him incapable of managing his finances or making reasoned decisions about his property, including whether to sell his house? She looked at the judge, not at Victor. Quite the opposite. Mr. Hendemet. Lawson demonstrates excellent orientation, consistent attention, intact executive function, and detailed autobiographical memory. His understanding of budgets, obligations, and the implications of a house sale was precise. From a clinical perspective, a decision to simplify one's living situation in later life is not evidence of impairment. It is evidence of foresight. A low murmur slid across the benches. Victor let it fade. No further questions. Daniel's lawyer tried to chip at the edges on Cross, asking whether grief can mask decline, whether a polite man can overperform in an evaluation, whether she had considered the witnesses. She answered each question cleanly and with the same composure. Grief is not decline. Consistency across sessions is not performance. Anecdotes are not data. When she stepped down, Victor called Elena. She walked to the stand wearing a charcoal jacket and a focus that made even the microphone seem unnecessary. The bailiff swore her in. Victor nodded to the courtroom technician, and a screen blinked to life beside the witness box. A chart appeared. Simple and devastating. Dates on the bottom axis. Sums on the left. 2 lines moving like mirror images across the months. M's. Cho. Please explain Exhibit A. This line, she said, pointing to the blue, is the outflow from Mr. Lawson's retirement and brokerage accounts over 18 months. This line, the red, is the inflow into Pacific Horizons LLC over the same period. The timing and amounts match. These are not market losses. These are transfers. She clicked the remote. The next slide showed a sequence of wire confirmations. Account numbers masked, except for the last 4 digits that linked them, unmistakably. She clicked again. There were invoices, shipping records, and a boutique revenue graph with spikes that rose neatly a few days after each major transfer. Victor kept his questions short. What is Pacific Horizons? On paper, a development company. In practice, a funnel. Where do the funds go after Pacific Horizons? Several destinations. Primary among them accounts used for a resort project near Cabo. And what personal expenditures correlate with the transfers? A list appeared on the screen. A Tesla delivery. A jewelry purchase. A down payment on a second property. A European trip. Dates and amounts matched like teeth on a gear. Daniel's lawyer objected to the characterization. To the word, funnel. To the choice of red line. The judge sustained the objection to the word and overruled the rest. The chart remained. M's. Cho. Victor said, one more thing. Did you also analyze communications and meeting logs connected to the petition? I did. What did you find? A cluster of preparatory contacts between the petitioner and the two investors in the weeks before the petition. A series of emails labeled concern but discussing optics. A calendar entry for an introduction to Dr. Doc Porter 2 days before the party where he claims to have formed his opinion. Thank you. No further questions. Cross-examination tried to turn complexity into confusion, implying that every account map is an interpretation. Elena did not argue. She returned to numbers and dates. She let the record carry its own weight. Victor waited for the last objection to fall away. Then he lifted a small plastic bag from counsel table and approached the clerk. Your Honor, we move to admit Exhibit N. A digital audio file recorded in Mr. Lawson's home on the date stated in the chain of custody affidavit, which is attached. Admitted, the judge said after a glance at the paperwork. The speakers clicked. For a moment there was only the soft noise of a kettle beginning to heat. Then our voices entered the room. Mine first, saying, I would make tea because the numbers gave me a headache. Footsteps. A rustle of paper. Then Daniel. Stripped of performance. You do not think he will actually sell, do you? If he does, we are finished. The investors are already breathing down my neck. Sophie's reply arrived cold and efficient. We cannot let him. He is more confused than I thought. This Palm Springs nonsense proves it. If he will not listen, we take the next step. A beat of silence. Then Daniel. Smaller. The next step. Sophie's voice did not waver. Conservatorship. We prove incompetence. Then the house is ours to protect. He will not have a choice. The recording ended with the click of a cup against a saucer and my footsteps returning. The courtroom stayed very still. Somewhere in the back, a pen fell and clattered once against the floor. Victor did not speak immediately. He let the air settle back over the room. Your Honor, he said at last, the petitioner calls this a rescue. The record calls it what it is. Daniel's lawyer sprang up to object that the recording was out of context. That a family's private strategizing about a loved one's safety should not be twisted into malice. The judge held up a hand. Overruled. The witness's own words stand on their own. Victor returned to our table and put his palm flat on the pad as if feeling for the heartbeat of the case. We do not dispute that aging can be complicated, he said. We dispute that confusion needs to be invented to seize control. The petitioner asks this court to replace Mr. Kaur Lawson's judgment with his own. The evidence shows the petitioner's judgment is not to be trusted with a parking meter, let alone a father. He sat. The judge looked from one table to the other, then down at her notes. She did not rule. Not yet. She had seen the scaffold. She wanted to see the foundation. Counsel for respondent, she said. Anything further? Yes. Your Honor, Victor said, rising once more. One final witness. Then the record will be complete. He called a name I did not recognize yet. A man in a conservative suit stepped forward, carrying a leather portfolio with careful hands. He introduced himself as a forensic document examiner with 30 years of experience. A curriculum vitae longer than a tide chart. The judge checked the clock. We will take him after lunch, she said. Be ready at 1:30. The bailiff called the recess, and the room broke open into a low tide of whispers. As people filed out, Daniel remained seated, staring at the dark screen where the red and blue lines had been. Sophie touched his sleeve and whispered something I could not hear. He did not look at her. For the first time since this began, his face showed nothing at all. Victor leaned toward me. The first wall is down, he said quietly. After lunch, we show what was taken from Margaret. I nodded and felt the oddest sensation rise in my chest, like clean air moving into a room where a window had been painted shut for years. The war was not won, but for the first time, I could see the far side of it. The bailiff's voice rang out, and the courtroom reconvened after lunch. The chatter that had buzzed in the gallery before recess had thinned into whispers. People shifted in their seats, waiting. Everyone had felt the blow of the recording, and now they were bracing for the next strike. Victor stood, as if the weight of the air itself belonged to him. "Your Honor," he said evenly. "The respondent calls Mr. Intane. Adrian Price, forensic document examiner." A man in his 60s with steel-gray hair walked to the stand, carrying a leather portfolio. He took the oath with a solemn nod, his fingers steady. When he opened his case file, the courtroom lights seemed to catch the edges of truth waiting inside. Victor approached. "Mr. Price, please state your qualifications for the record." The man cleared his throat. "I have been a certified forensic document examiner for 32 years. I've testified in both state and federal courts more than 90 times. I specialize in signature analysis and handwriting authentication." Victor slid a document onto the projector. A beneficiary amendment form. Its ink faint but legible. "Do you recognize this exhibit?" "Yes," Price said. "This is the amendment filed with Horizon Life Insurance, changing the beneficiary of Margaret Lawson's policy from the Ethan Lawson Educational Trust to Daniel Lawson." "And did you compare the signature on this form to known genuine samples of Margaret Lawson's handwriting?" "I did." "And your conclusion?" Price lifted his eyes from the document to the judge. "The signature on this amendment is a forgery. While it mimics certain features of Margaret Lawson's writing, it lacks the fluidity of a genuine hand. The pressure is inconsistent. The angle of the M, incorrect. The loop of the G, unnaturally tight. It is not a signature written in the declining strength of a sick woman. It is a signature produced by someone carefully imitating." The words hung in the room like a struck bell. Victor let the silence stand before speaking again. "So to be clear, Mr. Wanning, Price, in your expert opinion, Margaret Lawson did not sign this amendment?" "Correct," Price said firmly. "Someone else did." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge's pen paused mid-note. Victor pressed forward. "And what was the effect of this fraudulent amendment?" Price glanced at his notes. "It redirected the payout of Margaret Lawson's $1.2 million life insurance policy from the grandson's trust to Daniel Lawson personally." A low thud of shock swept the benches. Across the aisle, Sophie's composure cracked the necklace she had so carefully adjusted trembled against her collarbone. Daniel's face drained of color, the lawyer beside him whispering furiously. Victor didn't stop. He gestured to Elena, who stepped to the projector with calm precision. Slide by slide, she revealed the bank confirmations, a wire transfer from Horizon Life Insurance deposited directly into Daniel's personal account 2 weeks after Margaret's death. Another transfer from Daniel's account into Pacific Horizons LLC days later. Then photographed Sophie wearing a diamond bracelet, Daniel holding keys to a beachside condo, all purchased within weeks of the deposit. Elena's voice never rose. This wasn't only theft from a father still alive. It was theft from a dying mother's last wish. Margaret Lawson wanted her grandson Ethan's education secured. Instead, her final gift was diverted and laundered through Pacific Horizons. The gallery erupted in whispers so loud, the bailiff barked for silence. "Victor, let the final slide linger, a side-by-side comparison of Margaret's true signature from her will and the forged one from the amendment." The difference was glaring now, undeniable even to an untrained eye. "Your Honor," Victor said, his voice rising with restrained force, "the petitioner has painted this conservatorship as an act of love. But the truth is now in the record. This is not about protection. It is about predation. Daniel Lawson and his wife Sophie conspired to strip Richard Lawson of his autonomy, his savings, and even his late wife's last legacy to their grandson. This petition is not a shield. It is a weapon, and it has been turned back upon them." The judge's gaze was granite. She looked at Daniel, then at Sophie, then back at the exhibits on the screen. When she spoke, Her voice carried the finality of stone grinding against stone. "The petition for conservatorship is denied," she said. "Furthermore, effective immediately, this court orders a freeze on all known assets belonging to Daniel and Sophie Lawson. This file, including evidence of financial malfeasance and forgery, is referred to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation." The gavel struck once, sharp as a crack of thunder. The silence that followed was deeper than any words. Sophie broke it first, sobbing into her hands, her shoulders convulsing with grief and terror. Daniel sat rigid, his knuckles white on the table, his lawyer whispering in frantic bursts he no longer heard. I remained still, my breath steady. The storm had broken. The war was over. As the bailiff moved to escort Daniel and Sophie from the courtroom, Ethan's face came to my mind, not here, not tainted by this ugliness, but smiling in the garden, Margaret's kindness alive in his eyes. The legacy she intended for him was safe now, and the truth, however brutal, had spoken. When I finally stood, my knees felt both heavy and free. Victor's hand touched my arm, grounding me. Elena gave a small nod, her eyes fierce but softened at the edges. We had not won with fury. We had won with patience, with evidence, with the cold, undeniable voice of the record. The family I thought I had was gone, but the dignity I feared I had lost was mine again. And in the still air of that courtroom, beneath the weight of all that had been revealed, I understood that justice had never been about vengeance. It had been about Margaret, about Ethan, about truth finally given the room to stand. Spring arrived in San Diego with the quiet gentleness Margaret had always loved. The jacarandas bloomed violet along the streets, their petals scattering across sidewalks like confetti after a parade. I spent most mornings in the garden, kneeling in the damp soil, pruning roses, the way she once taught me, cutting back the excess so the roots could breathe and the blossoms could thrive. The courtroom battle had ended months earlier, but its echoes lingered. Daniel and Sophie's accounts were frozen, their names tangled in indictments and hearings that I no longer attended. Their world, built on lies and greed, was collapsing in ways both public and private. I had no desire to watch it crumble, brick by brick. The fight had already taken enough of me. Instead, I turned my eyes toward what Margaret had asked of me in her own quiet way: to protect Ethan. One Saturday morning, I called him out to the garden. At 16, his shoulders were starting to broaden, his voice steadying into something deeper, though he still had the same thoughtful eyes that reminded me so much of his grandmother. He sat cross-legged in the grass, sneakers brushing the soil. I reached for the manila envelope I had placed on the bench beside me. Inside was the restored trust agreement, the very one Margaret had signed years ago, before illness had dimmed her strength. "Your grandmother wanted you to have this," I told him, my throat thick. "She wanted you to go to college without worry, to have choices she never had." He opened the envelope slowly, reading the words with a seriousness beyond his years. His lips parted when he reached the line that named him as sole beneficiary. "This is for me?" "For you," I said softly. "It was always meant for you. What was stolen, we fought to return. Your grandmother's last gift lives again in your name." He didn't speak right away. Instead, he leaned forward and wrapped his arms around me. His embrace was strong, fierce even, as if he understood that words could never carry the weight of what had been lost and reclaimed. I held him tightly, feeling Margaret in that moment, the echo of her laughter, the warmth of her hand guiding mine through the thorns of life. When he finally pulled back, his eyes shone. "Thank you, Grandpa," he whispered. I shook my head. "Thank her," I said. "I only kept the promise." In the weeks that followed, the house felt less like a fortress under siege and more like a home again. Friends stopped by for coffee. Neighbors waved as I tended the roses. And Ethan often joined me at the workbench in the garage. We sanded old wood together, repaired hinges, and built small birdhouses just for the sake of hearing the hammer ring against nails. Yet even in peace, grief lived close by. The truth about Daniel cut deeper than any loss I had prepared for. My son, the boy whose first steps I once caught, whose scraped knees I once bandaged, whose victories I once cheered, had chosen greed over family. That wound would never fully close. But grief, I learned, does not mean surrender. It means carrying the weight and choosing where to set it down. I chose to set it in the soil, in the trust. In the future Margaret and I had always dreamed for Ethan. When I look back now, the lesson is as clear as the morning light spilling through the garden windows. Trust is a gift, but it is not blind. Love can be deep, but it must also be watchful. For 2 years, I believed that kindness could never hide cruelty, that family ties could never strangle. I was wrong. The people closest to us can twist affection into a cage if we hand them the keys without question. Yet justice is not about rage. It is not about shouting the loudest or striking the hardest. Justice lives in patience. It lives in records, in the unyielding persistence to follow the truth through every dark corner until it stands in daylight where no lie can touch it. I did not defeat Daniel and Sophie by matching their schemes. I defeated them by refusing to abandon facts, by trusting those who still honored truth, by letting the slow, steady weight of evidence speak louder than betrayal. The dignity I thought I had lost was never gone. It was waiting, buried beneath layers of deception, until I dug it out with the same care I used to prune the roses. Cut back the rot, tend the roots, let the bloom return. Now, when the evenings fall quiet, I sit in my thinking chair and listen to the faint hum of the city in the distance. The silence no longer feels heavy. It feels earned. Ethan's laughter drifts from the kitchen. And sometimes, I catch myself talking to Margaret's, photographed the way I always did, telling her about the trust restored, the boy becoming a man, the future secured. She doesn't answer, but the silence speaks all the same. It tells me we endured. It tells me we reclaimed what mattered. If you carry anything from my story, let it be this: family is sacred, but not everyone who wears the name honors the bond. Guard your trust. Ask the hard questions. And when betrayal comes, as it sometimes does, remember that truth, though slow, is stronger than deceit. True justice does not roar. It does not swagger. It arrives in the quiet weight of facts, in the steady patience to let the record reveal what words try to hide. And when it arrives, it restores not only what was taken, but the dignity that seemed lost forever. That is the lesson I leave behind. In this garden, in Ethan's hands, in the silence Margaret left for me to fill. Justice is not born of anger, but of courage, the courage to believe that truth, no matter how painful, will always find its way home.